Hello AP Human Geography, it's Miss Levy, and we are here to review the Chapter 9, Key Issue 1, the Measures of Economic Development. We're talking about the class notes, the guided notes that you did. So let's take a look at these. So we know we're talking about Chapter 9, Key Issue 1, so we're talking about development. And when we're looking at development, it's really important, please take a look up here at the very top. If you don't have these notes, I highly recommend that you do pause and put the notes down. So when we're talking about development is measured by the HDI. So we see it here at the top of the paper, the HDI. And the HDI is called the Human Development Index. And the HDI is the Human Development Index, the United Nations created measure of a country's level of development. And in order to calculate that level of development, you take your social plus your demographic plus your economic data. So what this really is, the formula is, you have your life expectancy index. Your life expectancy index is here. So you have your life expectancy. You have your education index, which does take into consideration the index is created by the literacy rates and the average years of education, average years people go to school. And finally, from your GDP, your gross domestic product, which is the total dollar value of all the goods and services, all the economic value of everything produced in your country in a year. Sometimes they'll use the GNI, which is the gross national income. This is your average incomes per person of people in a year. Again, both GDP and GNI are economic measures. Education, literacy, this gives your education index. This is a social indicator, and then your life expectancy gives you your demographic. Your highest that a country can be is 1 or 100% developed. There is no country in the world today that is a 1 or 100% developed. That would mean that they would have to be maximum in all of the GDP, GNI, maximum in education years, meaning that every person has to go to the maximum number of expected years of school. Every person has to meet this maximum literacy rate. Every person lives to this life expectancy, and we know that's not going to happen. So this HDI then gives us a number, and that number, less than 1, that then categorizes that country as LDC, DC, or MDC. So that's how these countries then are categorized as either LDC, DC, or MDC. Remember, in this class, our main purpose is to explain, to analyze a country's level of development, so categorize them as actually what level of development, LDC, DC, or MDC. Then explain why they are that level of development based on their indicators like life expectancy, literacy rates, education, their GDP, their economic, their social, and demographic indicators. And then finally, how do they progress? How do they increase that level of development? And so when we look at development, development is defined as the process of improving the material conditions. So this has to be tangible conditions of your people. Their living conditions, meaning that they have better health care, they have better water systems, sewage systems, better communication systems, better transportation systems. They have better housing. They have better jobs. They have better clothes. So these are the material conditions of the people through the diffusion of knowledge and technology. So this is where we need that knowledge. This knowledge this is the education element, and that increases your education and your life expectancy, and the technology, which will improve your GDPs, your life expectancy, and education. The key component to development is the development of infrastructure, the infrastructure. And building infrastructure in a society requires access to money. So when you talk about improving the material conditions, in order to do that at the necessity, the base, you have to have proper infrastructure. And infrastructure, this is the backbone of a society. These are your road systems, your transportation networks like rail, air, your electrical systems. So do you have electricity, and is it reliable, and does it go throughout both urban to rural? Your communication systems, your water systems, your sewage systems, and sanitation systems. This is what can lower death rates of your society. is this infrastructure system, because all of a sudden you see improvements in transportation, you have improvements in electricity and electrical networks, communication, then you have better and more clean, reliable water systems, sewage systems, and sanitation systems for trash. All right, so let's take a look at all of these indicators. We're going to start with the economic indicators. So please find your guided notes and follow along with me. If you don't have what I have, I would add it. So let's start with the economic indicators. So we know we have the gross domestic product. This is a per capita or per person statistic. And gross domestic product, the higher the gross domestic product is, the stronger the economy is. That means the more money that it's generating. The lower means the lower, the weaker the economy. So a growing GDP means that that economy is growing, that is improving, it's increasing. A shrinking GDP means that country is declining in terms of level of economic development. GDP is the total value of goods and services produced within a country in a year. So it's all money that is made, the value of everything generated. We're talking about everything from the services to the goods produced to everything sold. And this is a measure of economic growth and economic activity. This is usually measured per person, but it does not reflect distribution. So this implies, like in the United States, our GDP per person is $40,000 per person. That does not mean that every year the economy just gives $40,000 per person in our country. So that's not evenly distributed. I mean, there are some people in this country who make $1 billion per year. Some of the hedge fund people and some of the most wealthy people in this country, they make $1 billion a year. Well, that's far above the $40,000 per year the GDP is averaging. This just gives you an average of how much is your economy producing per person per year? Like how much is it sustaining? In LDCs, you will see a low GDP. In Sub-Saharan Africa, you may see a GDP of $3,000 per person per year, very low. In DCs, the emerging markets, it should be growing. And in MDCs, it should be high, like the United States is at $40,000 per person per year. Far different than what can be at $3,000 per year in Sub-Saharan African countries. This is the difference in how much education can be provided for your people, the roads that can be, and all the social services that can be provided, because look at the difference, and they just don't have the money in LDCs. The difference is staggering. And yes, it is used in an HDI. Next is the statistics of the types of jobs, the economic structure. There are three types of jobs, sectors in an economy. We have primary, secondary, and tertiary. And this gives you an idea of, are people working to secure essentials, or are they producing non-essentials? In an LDC, most people will be working in the primary sector. In primary sector, they extract raw materials from the earth. Primary sector, we're talking about farming, fishing, mining, and logging. So that's farming, fishing, mining, logging. Farming, fishing, mining, logging, these are all people that extract raw materials from the earth. In LDCs, most people are subsistence farmers, so obviously they're going to be in primary sector. Secondary, in DCs, you should see most people working in secondary, mainly, and some tertiary, and still some primary. This is the transition. Remember, to go from LDC to DC to MDC, this is a continuum. So mainly LDCs you see mainly primary, and in MDCs you see mainly tertiary, then DCs you should see both practiced. And in the secondary sector, they turn this raw material into a finished product, usually in factories, in construction, in building, and in textiles, making of clothing. Those are all secondary. They're manufacturing that's produced in a factory. Next is tertiary. Tertiary, this is service-based. They don't need secondary. They don't need primary because they're mostly using machines for that in an MDC. Like in commercial agriculture, they have mostly machines. Even in manufacturing, they have mostly machines and robots doing those jobs. So most people their jobs are in the service base. They sell to consume, like a doctor, lawyer, teacher, retail person. All of that is in the tertiary sector. And no, it is not part of the HDI. Next, still we have economic. These are the access to raw materials. Access to raw materials, this would be like mineral, water, and energy. This is what really drives development. And so do you have mineral resources? Do you have access to water resources? Do you have access to energy? Energy obviously is what provides the fuel for development. Water is for transportation, but also obviously for the health of the people. And then mineral resources. United States, we're very lucky we have all three. In LDCs, they tend to lack infrastructure, so it doesn't really matter if they have the mineral, water, or energy. LDCs, they don't have the infrastructure to extract it. In DCs, they're developing that infrastructure and they're exporting a lot of their mineral resources, their energy resources to drive their development. And then in MDCs, they're focusing mainly on technology to improve these mineral resources, the water, and the energy. And no, that's also not an HDI. Next is availability of consumer goods. Are people focusing on essentials, or can they afford non-essentials? Non-essentials would be like TV, car, phones, and not just having one TV, but multiple TVs. Not just one car, but multiple cars, and having what type of car, how nice is it? Same thing with the phone. This is a measure of a society's wealth. In LDCs, they're focusing mainly on providing essentials, food, water, shelter, clothing. In DCs, you begin to see this rise of the haves and the have-nots, where you have the have-nots who are focusing on essentials and the haves who have a lot. You see this in a lot of developing countries. And then in MDCs, you have mostly people focused on providing the non-essentials for themselves. Next is social. Social, we have education and literacy. And education and literacy, this is the average number of years that people attend school, and the literacy is the percentage of people who can read and write. This gives you your skill level of your workforce. Low skill tends to be low wage. That means they don't make a lot of money. So that means they don't have a lot of education and literacy typically. High skill is high wage, means the high skill, high wage, they make more money. So in LDCs, you tend to see lower levels of this education and literacy. That's because people are focused mainly on working in the primary sector. They're extracting raw materials, mainly subsistence farmers. In the DCs, you tend to see a growing, increasing education and literacy. You see more people who are working in the secondary sector, and even that is improving skill level over the subsistence farming. And then in the MDCs, you tend to see higher numbers of education and literacy, and more people working in the service base, the tertiary jobs with high wage, high skill jobs. Next is health and welfare. This gives you the health care and access to social programs of your people. Can you provide for your dependents, your sick, and your poor? That's really what this is telling you. And in an LDC, this is going to be very low. They don't have a lot of access to services for their sick and their poor. In a DC like Mexico and Brazil, it should be increasing. It should be growing, like in India and China. Excuse me. And in an MDC, they should have more access to health care and social programs, more help for their sick and the poor, because they just have more money. And this is not part of the HDI, but the education literacy obviously is. And finally, here we are with the demographic. We have our life expectancy, which is the average number of years a person will live. This gives you your health care, the health of your society. This is low in an LDC, increasing in a DC, and high in an MDC. And yes, this is part of the HDI. You have your infant mortality rate, which is the number of babies who will die within a year of their life. This gives you the health of your maternity and paternity care. A prenatal care, it's very high in an LDC like Afghanistan. It should be decreasing in a DC and low in an MDC. Natural increase rate, this is your population growth rate. So this is your accrued birth rate minus your accrued death rate. And this gives you your population growth. This population growth is very high in an LDC. It should be decreasing in a DC, and it should be low in an MDC. And finally, you have your accrued birth rate. And this is the number of babies born per 1,000 per year. This gives you your stage of your demographic transition model, the economic output and the status of women. It should be high in an LDC, decreases in a DC, and low in MDC. So why not consider the accrued death rate? Because life expectancy could be higher, but it could be, you could have a high accrued death rate like in stage 4. And So whenever we look at this core periphery and how it pertains, remember the core periphery model is a model of economic and political dominance. Core is your MDC, semi-periphery are your DCs, and periphery are your LDC. Thank you.